Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Kaldheim, Svella Ice Shaper. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is by Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube, while higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to both down in the description. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Not only that, but this deck tech was chosen by my patrons. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Svella is a 2/4 Troll Warrior for 1 generic, 1 red, and 1 green. Why it's not a Troll Artificer instead of a Warrior is beyond me, but whatever. Moving on, these are decent stats which allows us for recasting it from the command zone multiple times in a game. If that weren't enough, Svella creates a snow version of Manalith for just 3 generic and tapping. Not only can this help in accelerating our game further by creating mana rocks, but Svella can further accelerate it with its second activated ability. For a whopping 8 mana and tapping, you look at the top 4 cards of your deck and cast any one of them for free. Granted, this might seem like a lot of mana to pay, so you'd need to be creating quite a lot of icy mana lists to pull it off, as well as getting other mana sources on the battlefield. Not only that, but to make the most of it, you'd want to cast it with spells that have a mana value of 8 or higher, or double down on Svella's ability. Additionally, to make the most out of cheating those spells, the deck dips heavy in its inclusion of plenty of huge beaters, Eldrazi in particular, since these have Annihilator and can also help disrupt opponents' board states. First things first though, let's see how we're going to make the most out of Svella's activated abilities. We can copy them to great effect with Illusionist Bracers, Lithoform Engine, and Rings of Brighthearth. The Bracers do it for free, they simply have to be equipped to Svella. This is great because you get 2 Icy Manaliths for just 3 mana and tapping. You also double the second ability. Keep in mind that when you do this, you only get 1 spell per the first 4 cards, so first you look at the top 4, free cast a spell, bottom deck the rest, then look at the next top 4 cards to free cast 1 for those, etc. The Engine and Rings require paying 2 mana. It's a bit more efficient doing so to get 2 Icy Manaliths for 5 mana, which is still a good enough deal, but I'd rather use them more on the second ability. It essentially increases the activation cost to 10 mana, but at least you can cheat 1 spell from the top 4 cards in 2 consecutive instances. If those spells happen to be greater than 8 mana, then the investment well pays off. Speaking of doubling Icy Manaliths, doubling Season, Parallel Lives, and Primal Vigor can do all that for free. These are pretty self-explanatory. Each one will double how many Svella creates. If you manage to have more than one of these on the battlefield, then you'll definitely be generating a ton of mana. We can also get multiple activations by simply untapping Svella. Staff of Domination, Sword of the Power Runes, and Umbral Mantle are mana sinks that do just that. You can use these to either get more Icy Manaliths with your extra mana, or get another free cast activation. If you manage to create multiple copies of Icy Manalith thanks to the doubling enchantments, it's very possible to achieve infinite mana since you're creating more Icy Manaliths than the amount of mana needed to activate and untap Svella. With infinite mana, you can then free cast your entire library by untapping and then activating Svella each time. Seedborn Muse and Patron of the Orochi also help with untapping Svella, but for free. While Patron is limited to once per turn, it does untap itself since it's green, so you can use it every turn. This will allow you to activate Svella every turn, which does a lot in the long run, especially if you're using its second ability. Not only that, but it's great to have your permanents untapped to have blockers ready and mana available for responses. Scroll Rack is another way to really abuse Svella's second ability. Not only does this work to replace cards in your hand with cards from your library without triggering effects from cards like Hull Breacher, but you can also shuffle away those cards with simply cracking a fetch land. However, more importantly than that, it can help you put a fatty from your hand onto the library in response to Svella's ability in order to guarantee which spell you're free casting from the top 4. Kodama of the East Tree is yet another way to take advantage of cheating cards from your hand, permanents at least. When you free cast a fatty, it'll trigger Kodama when it enters the battlefield. You can then use this trigger to drop another fatty from your hand of equal or less mana value. Not only that, but it also helps you empty your hand of lands thanks to how it works with fetch lands, so it also helps your deck get even further ahead in mana. Since the deck has so many expensive spells, it's important to be able to hard cast them in case we can't cheat anything. As for the beaters that will be cheating, look no further than the beefiest of the Eldrazi. Since Svella allows us to cast them, we still benefit from any cast triggers these creatures should have. As mentioned earlier, the biggest Eldrazi with Annihilator were included, these being Artisan of Kozilek, Kozilek Butcher of Truth, Hand of Emrakul, Id that Betrays, Pathrader of Ulamog, Spawn Sire of Ulamog, Ulamog's Crusher, and Ulamog the Infinite Gyre. As I just mentioned, Svella casts these spells from our library, so we still get any cast triggers, which can be incredibly useful, especially from Artisan of Kozilek, Ulamog, and Kozilek. Getting these Annihilator creatures early on can be very taxing to opponents, but it also serves as a way to not only deal damage to them, but get rid of any of their permanents as well. The other Eldrazi included are Conduit of Ruin, Decimator of the Provinces, Desolation Twin, Emrakul the Promised End, Oblivion Sower, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, and Void Winnower. While these are in no way less useful than the previous set of Eldrazi due to their lack of Annihilator, they're still incredibly useful and or oppressive. Decimator of the Provinces can actually be hard cast for much cheaper thanks to its emerge cost in case you have enough creatures to go in for an alpha strike and don't want to simply cheat it from the top as another beater. Not all of the beaters in the deck are Eldrazi though. Blightsteel Colossus and Darksteel Colossus are the remaining colorless fatties in the deck. Being able to cheat these early on will definitely make you arch enemy, especially because they're indestructible and thus harder to deal with. Blightsteel Colossus alone can end the game if swinging into a board without blockers. Apex Devastator and Wolfspine Worm are the final fatties of the deck. The worm self-shuffles into the library from the graveyard and it also makes tokens when it dies. This is a great backup against board wipes or spot removal. Apex Devastator has quadruple cascade, so if you manage to cheat this from the top, its cascade triggers still happen. So you'll get 4 additional spells for the price of 1, even if you hard cast it from your hand. Since it costs 10 to cast, it's very possible to also get some Eldrazi from its cascade triggers. Keswick Wolfrun is included as a great mana sink since the deck does produce a ton of it. Since not all fatties have trample, this can help a single attacker take out an opponent or even into Svella itself to get commander damage win, especially if you generate infinite mana. Besides Annihilator, the deck does have more conventional ways to deal with opponents' cards. Chaos Warp, Beast Within, and Scour from Existence can get rid of any permanent at instant speed. The last one's a bit overcosted at 7 mana, but it presents no upside for the opponent and is not that hard to cast in this deck with all the mana it can generate. Vandal Blast is equally viable to easily overload and get rid of all opponents' artifacts. However, as fun as overloading this is, having it done to us can be immeasurably devastating because of all of our icy mana lists. Thus, Heroic Intervention is included in the deck. Not just as a catch-all for any and all board wipes that destroy, but giving hexproof to our entire board in a pinch as well. Archetype of Endurance is another way of giving hexproof to all of our creatures, while also removing it from opponents' creatures. It might be a bit overcosted, but keep in mind that we can always cheat it from the top or hard cast it with all of our mana, or cheat it in with Kodama. Switchfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves are single ways, and much cheaper too, of generating defense against targeted effects. Svella isn't that important to protect at first since it only costs you to cast, but any of these footwear can be used to protect other creatures like Kodama or anything else that we want to do. Deflecting Swat is another protective effect in the deck with the potential of being cast out of nowhere since it's free. Not only can this be used against spot removal or control effects, but we can also seal time magic if an opponent chooses themselves as the target player. As for more responses of our own, Pyrohemia and Silk/Spider are amazing at wiping the board in a more controlled fashion. Not only are they great mana sinks, but they help wipe the board of any weak chump blockers while leaving our fatties alive enough to swing into empty boards. The Spider is especially useful since it only hits flyers, an ability greatly lacking in the deck. So it'll only hit opponents' flyers, which is a great line of defense as well. With Pyrohemia, if we have enough mana and enough life, that alone would be enough to win us the match. Even though Svella can cheat a card from the top 4, we still have to be able to cast our responses when it's most ideal to, so we do have to draw cards conventionally. The Great Henge and Guardian Project take advantage of each creature entering the battlefield to draw us a card. The Henge in particular is great because we can free cast it from the top and save that mana, or it can be very cheap to cast if we already have a fatty in play. As a bonus, it can also tap for double green and 2 life as well as putting a +1/+1 counter on the creatures, making our fatties that much fatter. Return of the Wild Speaker, Witchcraft's Expertise, and Soul's Majesty also take advantage of the size of our beaters and can fill our hand for so many cards, sometimes too many to keep. But that's fine if we end up discarding any of the 2 Eldrazi Titans, we'll just shuffle our entire graveyard back into our library, so it's no big deal. Either way, Reliquary Tower is included if we do want to keep a limitless hand of cards. It doesn't enter the battlefield tapped and it can generate mana, which isn't an issue in a 2-colored deck like this one. Even less so since most of the costs are generic anyways. As for taking even more advantage of Svella's mana acceleration, Nyx Bloom Ancient, Mana Reflection, and Doubling Cube all help in multiplying our mana. While the first 2 do so passively, Doubling Cube needs to be activated and it doubles the mana already in our mana pool. So you have to think a bit ahead with how much mana you want to sink and how much you want to keep available. Birds of Paradise, Llanowar Elves, Finhorn Elves, Elvish Mystic, and Boreal Druid make the deck even faster in the very early game. Getting Svella out quickly and then being able to activate it while also being able to cast other things can get us way ahead. Since Svella's token creating ability is paid with just generic mana, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, and Arcane Signet can also help out with that. The Signet is still a solid inclusion since it can help with casting Svella or the Mana Dorks. Keep in mind that there's a lot of expensive spells in the deck, so these Dorks and Rocks also help with hard casting them, as well as activating Svella's second ability. Farseek, Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, Rampant Growth, and Into the North also help in accelerating the deck in the early game, but besides that, also help with something very important, which is thinning the deck of lands. We want to whiff as infrequently as possible, so limiting how many lands appear in those top 4 cards is definitely useful. Granted, we can only cheat one of those spells, but imagine hitting 4 straight lands. Reshape the Earth is also included for that very reason. The deck generates enough mana where it's not that difficult to hard cast early on. Not only that, but it's cheaper if we cheat it with Svella. That being said, it ramps us so far ahead that unless someone casts an Armageddon-like effect, we'll be in the late to end game, but the rest of the table is in the mid game. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 8 fetch lands, Cinderglade, Highland Forest, Sheltered Thicket, Stomping Ground, Taiga, Command Tower, Spire Garden, Carplusan Forest, Ancient Tomb, and Temple of the False God, as well as 7 of each snow-covered basic land in case anyone's running anything that benefits us for it. Even though the deck doesn't need that much mana fixing since most of the costs are generic, the fetch lands do thin the deck of lands as I mentioned earlier. That being said, as with all of my deck techs, the majority of the budget is in the mana base. You don't need these fetch lands to make the deck work, you can just as easily use budget substitutes and the deck will run just fine. Same with Taiga, you can swap it out for any other budget substitute. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Svella Ice Shaper. Even though I chose to build this deck as an Eldrazi tribal beatdown with a very simple, straightforward approach, you can just as easily build Svella however you want since there are plenty of other expensive spells you can cheat in with a second ability, so it's really up to you. Do keep in mind that if you fill your deck with too many expensive spells, you have to be able to hard cast them if the time comes. So there's that. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I'm Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.